Ask a podcast. Talk about it, think about it, discuss it. That's a podcast.
Hey everyone, I know a lot of you out there are worried about, well, what your kids are eating.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with school lunches and, just what's available these days.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a deep dive today into sugar and its impact on health.
Okay.
We are going to be looking primarily at Gary Taubes' book, The Case Against Sugar.
It's a good one.
And what I think is really interesting about Taubes' approach is
Right.
he kind of goes beyond that usual empty calories argument that we hear so much about with sugar.
Right.
He presents sugar as a potential cause of various chronic diseases, not just a kind of a side contributor to weight gain.
That's fascinating. So he's saying it's not just empty calories, it's actually causing these problems.
Yeah, and it's really eye-opening. And to be clear up front, we're not here to push any political agendas or anything.
Right.
We're just diving into the science to help you understand what role sugar might be playing in your health and your family's health.
Absolutely. It's about empowering people with knowledge so they can, make the best decisions for themselves.
Exactly. So let's talk about sugar. It's everywhere.
It is.
But it wasn't always this way. Taubes actually points out that sugar went from a luxury good to something that we find in almost every food today.
It's true. That shift really started, it took off during the Industrial Revolution, when we had mass production and all these new industries popping up, confectionery, cereals, soft drinks.
Yeah. And it's amazing to think that, it became so cheap and readily available. Because, back in the day, sugar was initially used as medicine.
Really?
And a preservative.
Huh. I never knew that.
It's pretty wild to think about how much our perception of sugar has changed.
It really has. And that whole journey, it highlights that evolution of our perception of this thing we call sugar.
Yeah, and Taubes draws a really interesting parallel to cigarettes.
Oh.
Sugar is used to make cigarettes more palatable.
Okay.
And get this, more addictive. So it really makes you think, could sugar be playing a similar role in, our food cravings and how much we eat?
It's an interesting comparison for sure. I mean, it makes you think, right?
Definitely something to consider. All right, so let's get down to the science here. Taubes is arguing that sugar isn't just about these empty calories.
Okay.
He really breaks down the different types of sugar and how they affect us differently.
That's important because we're not just talking about table sugar or sucrose, right? There's glucose, which everyone knows is the body's main energy source.
Right.
But then you have fructose, and fructose is processed very differently, primarily by the liver.
Yeah, and Taubes suggests that this difference in how fructose is metabolized could be a really big factor in these negative health effects that he talks about.
That makes sense. So break it down for me. What happens when you eat a lot of fructose?
Well, basically, he says that fructose metabolism, it can lead to like a buildup of fat in the liver.
Okay.
And then that can contribute to insulin resistance.
Insulin resistance. Now, for those of us who, maybe aren't as familiar with that term, could you explain what exactly that is?
Yeah, so think of it like this. Insulin is kind of like a key that unlocks your cells to let glucose in for energy, right? Insulin resistance is like that key's getting rusty, it's not working as well.
Ah, I see.
So your cells don't respond as well to the insulin, so the glucose has trouble getting in.
So the glucose just kind of builds up in the bloodstream then?
Exactly.
Isn't that what happens with diabetes?
I got it. So insulin resistance is a major feature of what's called metabolic syndrome.
Okay.
And this basically increases your risk of serious health problems like heart disease, stroke, and of course, type 2 diabetes.
Wow. So we're seeing this connection, right? Too much sugar, particularly fructose, it sounds like,
Yeah.
could lead to insulin resistance, which then leads to this metabolic syndrome.
Now the question is, what about specific diseases?
Right. How does sugar factor in?
Yeah, so Taubes looks at a bunch of different conditions, and let's start with probably the most obvious one, diabetes. He actually cites historical data, and particularly from Native American populations like the Pima, where a really significant rise in diabetes coincided with increased sugar consumption.
Oh, wow.
And it's not just diabetes, he also brings up high blood pressure, or hypertension as it's often called.
Right.
And research actually suggests that fructose can increase your uric acid levels, and those uric acid levels can negatively impact your blood vessels.
Oh, wow.
And that could contribute to hypertension.
So sugar potentially linked to high blood pressure as well.
And he even talks about cancer.
Really?
Yeah, so Taubes explores this potential link between sugar, again, insulin resistance, and cancer, suggesting that high insulin levels could potentially fuel tumor growth.
Wow, this is getting a little scary.
It is, and if I remember correctly, he even touches on Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, gosh, really?
Yeah, he highlights some research suggesting a possible connection between sugar, you guessed it, insulin resistance.
Oh, he's insulin resistant?
And Alzheimer's disease.
So we're seeing this potential link between sugar and all these really serious chronic diseases. It's a lot to take in.
It is, and Taubes introduces this concept of what he calls Western diseases.
Western diseases? What's that?
So these are chronic diseases that tend to cluster together.
Like?
Heart disease, diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, you name it.
Okay.
And he suggests that they might share some common dietary and lifestyle factors.
Right.
With sugar potentially playing a really significant role.
So almost like a web of interconnected health issues, and sugar is like a major thread running through it all.
Exactly. And then he takes it a step further and introduces this idea of metabolic programming.
Okay, no, I have no idea what that is.
So metabolic programming is this idea that what a mother eats during pregnancy could actually influence her child's health years down the road.
Wait, really? So what I eat now could impact my kid's health later on?
That's what he suggests. It raises a lot of questions about the long-term consequences of, our diets, especially those high in sugar.
It really makes you think, like, are we, without even realizing it, setting up future generations for these health problems?
That's a really good question and a very sobering thought.
It is.
But, to be fair, Taubes does acknowledge that proving a direct link between sugar and all of these chronic diseases is a challenge.
Right, it makes sense.
It's really hard to conduct those long-term studies. Right?
Yeah.
And isolate sugar's effects from all the other factors that we encounter in our diets and lifestyle.
Absolutely. It's complex. So much going on.
Yeah, it's not a simple equation.
Not at all.
But Taubes emphasizes the importance of considering the totality of evidence.
Okay, so where does this leave us? What does it all mean, for us and our families?
Well, while he doesn't give specific dietary advice, He encourages us to be mindful of our own sugar consumption, and really consider its potential impact on our health.
So basically, be more aware of how much sugar we're taking in.
Exactly. And he really stresses the importance of this, especially for children.
Yeah, of course.
Establishing those healthy eating habits early on.
Absolutely.
Focus on whole foods, limit processed foods, and sugary drinks.
Solid advice.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We went from sugar's history to its potential role in all of these chronic diseases.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, but this is just part 1.
Oh, there's more.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll actually delve deeper into specific examples from Taubes' book.
Okay.
And explore how sugar has really become so pervasive in our modern diet.
I can't wait. Welcome back. Glad to be diving back in with you.
Yeah, I feel like we just scratched the surface in part 1,
Oh, for sure.
with sugar's kind of complex story. But I think what really struck me is how sugar went from being like this luxury item to something we find in practically every food.
Yeah, it's everywhere you look. It's kind of wild, really.
It really is. And understanding that historical context is so important, I think, to really grasping the issue.
Oh, absolutely.
But let's shift gears a bit. Maybe look at some specific examples that Taubes talks about in his book.
All right, I'm all ears.
Well, he spends a good chunk of the book talking about the rise of the soft drink industry.
Okay.
And its connection to our, sugar consumption habits.
Yeah, it's amazing how much soda people drink these days.
It's a lot.
A lot.
And it's a relatively recent phenomenon.
Right.
And Taubes points out, soft drinks were initially marketed as health tonics. Yeah, sold in pharmacies.
No way.
Advertised for their, supposed medicinal benefits.
So soda was like the original energy drink.
Exactly. And then as sugar production increased and, prices dropped, soda became affordable and accessible to pretty much everyone.
Yeah, and that's when the marketing really took off.
Oh, yeah.
And then companies started targeting children and adolescents.
Creating this association between soda and, fun, youth, even athleticism sometimes.
It's crazy how, marketing can really shape our food choices, especially for kids.
I know they were just bombarded with messages about all this sugary stuff.
It's everywhere they look. And, it's interesting because it raises an important point about, personal responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
We can't just blame the food industry.
Right.
We have to be aware of these tactics and make informed choices for ourselves and our families.
100%. Knowledge is power. Right?
Absolutely. Oh, but going back to soda for a second, didn't Taubes mention something about Coca-Cola originally containing cocaine?
Yeah.
Actually cocaine.
It's pretty shocking, right?
It is. It was marketed as a brain tonic headache cure.
Interesting.
And it contained both cocaine and caffeine.
So when did the cocaine disappear?
Well, in the early 1900s, as concerns about cocaine's addictive nature kind of grew, Coca-Cola reformulated its recipe to remove it.
But even without the cocaine, soda was still popular.
Thanks to sugar.
Of course.
Sugar was really key to making these drinks palatable and arguably addictive.
Right. As soda consumption soared, so did the concerns about the potential health effects.
Of course. And it wasn't just soda, Taubes also talks about breakfast cereals.
Oh, yeah.
And how they became loaded with sugar.
Which is crazy because you think of cereal as grain-based. It should be healthy.
Right. Well, early cereal brands like Kellogg's Corn Flakes were marketed as health foods.
Makes sense.
Simple, wholesome way to start the day.
So what happened?
Sugar happened.
Oh, of course.
As competition grew in the cereal industry, companies started adding more and more sugar to their products.
Of course, to make them more appealing.
Especially to children.
Yeah, so breakfast cereal went from a health food to a sugary treat.
Pretty much, yeah. And it was all fueled by those marketing campaigns. Targeting kids with cartoon characters.
Yeah, right, color.
Promises of fun and excitement.
It's incredible how effective that stuff is.
It really is. And it just highlights, again, the importance of educating children about healthy eating.
Yeah.
It's not about depriving them, but creating a balanced diet
100%.
that emphasizes, whole foods over those processed options.
Now, back to Taubes for a second.
Yeah.
I remember him talking about the challenges of proving a definitive link between sugar and chronic diseases.
Right, and all the research.
Yeah, and I think he even mentioned the sugar industry, actively trying to downplay those risks.
Oh, absolutely. He describes how the sugar industry funded research that, emphasized the safety of sugar and downplayed its potential negative health effects.
So it's kind of like the tobacco industry.
Exactly, same tactics.
It's really disheartening.
It is. It's why it's so important to be critical consumers of information.
Absolutely.
And to really dig into the science.
Yeah, don't just take everything at face value.
No, question those assumptions. Consider multiple perspectives.
Okay, so we talked about soda, cereal, 2 major sources of sugar in our diets.
Big ones.
What about the science behind how sugar actually impacts our bodies?
Yeah, let's get into that a little bit. One key thing that Taubes emphasizes is the difference between how our bodies process glucose and fructose.
Right, we touched on that a bit in part 1.
We did, but it's worth, going a little deeper.
Okay, yeah, please.
So glucose is, like we said, our body's primary energy source.
Right.
It's used by cells throughout the body to fuel various functions. When we eat carbohydrates, they're broken down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream and triggers the release of insulin.
And insulin is what helps our cells absorb the glucose from the blood.
Exactly. Insulin's like a key that unlocks the door to our cells, allowing glucose to enter and be used for energy.
Makes sense. So what about fructose? How's that different?
Fructose is metabolized primarily by the liver.
Okay.
And when we consume large amounts of fructose, it can overload the liver, leading to a buildup of fat.
And that fat buildup, that's what contributes to insulin resistance.
Exactly. It's like the insulin key can't unlock the door to the cells as easily anymore. And then the glucose can't get into your cells, so it builds up in the bloodstream, leading to high blood sugar.
And chronically high blood sugar is basically what diabetes is.
Exactly. And then high blood sugar can damage blood vessels and nerves, leading to a whole cascade of other health problems.
Oh, it's a domino effect.
It really is, with potentially very serious consequences.
So just to recap, excessive fructose can overload the liver, leading to fat buildup, insulin resistance, and potentially diabetes.
Potentially, yeah. But it's not just diabetes.
Right.
Taubes also talks about the link between sugar and heart disease.
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, fructose can raise triglyceride levels in the blood. Triglycerides are a type of fat.
Right.
And they've been linked to an increased risk of heart disease.
So it's not just the high blood sugar then.
Yeah.
It's the fat in our blood too.
It's all interconnected.
It really is.
Fructose can contribute to both high blood sugar and high triglycerides.
Wow.
Both risk factors for heart disease.
It's crazy that one type of sugar can have so many effects.
I know, it's a reminder that even those small dietary choices can have big impacts on our health.
Absolutely. Now, we talked about how fructose is different from glucose.
Right.
What about sucrose?
Oh, good question.
That's just regular table sugar, right?
So sucrose is actually a disaccharide,
Oh.
meaning it's made up of two sugar molecules bonded together.
And those are tricose?
And fructose.
Ah, I should have known.
Sucrose is basically a 50-50 mix of the two.
So when we eat table sugar, we're getting a dose of both.
Exactly. And that means sucrose can have very similar effects on the body as fructose.
Okay.
It can contribute to that fat buildup in the liver, insulin resistance, high blood sugar, right, high triglycerides, the whole nine yards.
So sucrose is like a double whammy.
Pretty much. It's
Yeah.
not just about the sweetness, it's about how those specific types of sugar interact with our bodies.
Totally. It's really crucial then to be mindful of our sugar intake from all sources.
Absolutely. Whether it's table sugar,
Right.
high fructose corn syrup,
Mhm.
even things that seem healthy like fruit juice
Really?
can be very high in fructose.
So it's really about like moderation
Yeah.
and making those informed choices.
It is. It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, sugar's everywhere.
It is. But even small changes can make a big difference.
Like what?
Well, start by cutting back on sugary drinks.
Okay.
Swap soda for water. Or unsweetened tea.
Yeah,
Little changes add up over time.
that's a good point. And for parents, it's really about setting those good examples early on.
Absolutely.
Offer fruits and vegetables as snacks.
Right.
Instead of, cookies and candy all the time.
It's not about deprivation.
Right.
It's about balance.
Okay, so we've covered, the history of sugar, how it's gotten into our food, the science behind it.
Mm-hmm.
This has been really enlightening, to be honest.
It has been interesting, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely changed my perspective a little bit.
Stay tuned for part 3,
Oh, there's more.
where we'll explore some of those potential long-term consequences of sugar consumption
Okay,
and discuss some steps we can take to, reduce our intake and protect our health.
I'm ready for it.
Uh,
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into sugar.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has. In part 2, we really got into the nitty-gritty
The science.
of how our bodies process different types of sugar.
Yeah, all those different sugars.
It's pretty complex stuff.
It is, but understanding those mechanisms, I think, is so crucial to really getting a handle on
Yeah.
sugar's potential long-term effects on our health.
And that's what we're focusing on now,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Taubes doesn't just talk about the immediate impacts like, weight gain or high triglycerides. He connects sugar to some pretty major, long-term health issues down the road.
He does, and one of the most, I think, fascinating and compelling concepts he introduces is this idea of metabolic programming.
Yeah, metabolic programming. That was a new one for me.
Yeah, it's basically this idea that what a mother eats during pregnancy can actually have a really significant impact on her child's future health.
Wait, hold on. So what I eat while I'm pregnant could affect my kid's health years later.
That's what the research suggests.
Wow, that's kind of mind-blowing.
It is, and while more research is definitely needed in this area,
Right.
existing studies, they suggest that a mother's diet can actually influence her child's risk for developing things like obesity, type 2 diabetes,
Oh, wow.
and other metabolic disorders later in life.
So it's like we're setting the stage for their health from the very beginning.
It really is. It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. So if a mom consumes a lot of sugar during pregnancy, could that make her child more prone to, problems with sugar metabolism down the line?
That's what the research suggests, yeah.
Wow. So are we, without realizing it, passing on this predisposition to these chronic diseases to future generations?
It's a question we need to consider.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff.
It is.
But to be fair to Taubes, he does acknowledge that definitively proving sugar's role in all of these chronic diseases, it's difficult.
Of course, it's hard.
Right. It's not a simple cause and effect in every case.
Human studies on diet are so difficult to conduct.
Yeah, there are so many factors.
You can't isolate just one variable.
Right, over a whole lifetime.
People's diets change, their lifestyles change. There's so much going on.
So while Taubes presents, what I think is a really strong case against sugar, there's still a need for more research to
Absolutely.
solidify those connections.
Always a need for more research.
But even with, some uncertainty, those potential risks that he outlines, they're pretty concerning.
They are. And for me, some of the most compelling evidence comes from looking at populations that have experienced really rapid shifts in their diets.
Okay, like who?
Well, he talks about the Tokelau Islanders in the South Pacific.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about that. What happened there?
So traditionally, the Tokelauans had a diet that was primarily based on, fish, coconuts, root vegetables.
Okay, sounds pretty healthy.
Yeah, but then in the mid-20th century, they started importing more westernized foods, including a lot of sugar.
And I'm guessing this didn't end well?
Unfortunately, no. Rates of obesity, diabetes, and other metabolic diseases increased dramatically.
Wow, so it's like a real-world example of what Taubes is warning us about.
It is. It's hard to ignore.
Yeah. So what can we do about it? Individually, as families, how can we navigate this world where it feels like sugar is everywhere?
It's tough, but Taubes really emphasizes the importance of awareness.
Okay.
Read food labels. You'll be surprised where sugar is hiding.
Yeah, it's in everything.
It really is. Make informed choices based on that knowledge.
But it's hard to avoid sugar completely.
It is, but even small changes can make a difference.
Like what?
Start by cutting back on sugary drinks.
Okay.
Swap soda for water or unsweetened tea.
Right, little things.
Exactly. Little changes add up.
And for parents, it's about, setting good examples.
Absolutely.
And creating those healthy habits early on.
Offer fruits and vegetables as snacks instead of cookies and candy all the time.
Right, it's all about balance.
Exactly.
So we've explored the history of sugar, the science behind how it affects us, the potential long-term health risks.
We covered a lot.
What are your final thoughts?
For me, this whole deep dive, it's really underscored the importance of critical thinking when it comes to nutrition.
Oh, 100%.
We are just bombarded with information.
I know, it's overwhelming.
It is, and a lot of it's conflicting.
Right, what are we supposed to believe?
Exactly. That's why it's so important to really dig deep.
Yeah.
Question assumptions, consider the evidence, don't just accept everything you hear at face value.
Yeah, be a smart consumer.
Right.
And when it comes to sugar, the evidence, while not always completely conclusive, is definitely compelling.
It is.
It's something that deserves our attention.
For sure.
And careful consideration, especially when it comes to the health of our families.
I couldn't agree more. This has been really eye-opening, and I hope that it empowers our listeners to, make more informed choices about sugar.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But our goal is to help you understand this really complex issue and make the best choices for yourself and your loved ones.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of sugar.
Thanks, everyone.
Until next time, stay curious.